Imagine an American president standing at the podium of the White House, a conflict not of decades, not of a century, but of thousands of years. Not your average political quarrel, not even the kind of partisan brawl you would expect at a Thanksgiving dinner table, but a conflict that, according to Donald Trump, began in the book of Genesis itself, between two brothers, Isaac and Ishmael. What we witnessed the other day was therefore not just a political speech. It was a biblical declaration, one that cast the Israeli-Palestinian conflict at the very heart of Scripture. And today I want to explore with you what stood behind Trump's words and what this tells us about American culture itself. At the White House ceremony, launching the 21-point plan to end the war in Gaza and to usher in peace between Israel and the Arabs, Donald Trump kept repeating something that, at first, sounded rather odd. He said again and again, and we'll watch this clip in a moment, that the conflict between Israel and Hamas, or really between Israel and the Arabs, is thousands of years old. And therefore, he said, this day marks a turning point in the very history of civilization. Now, why do I call this odd? Because the state of Israel has only existed for 77 years. The Palestinians as a political entity are even less clear in historical terms. And if you really want to go back in time, the Balfour Declaration, the British commitment to establish a national home for the Jewish people in the land of Israel, was issued just over 100 years ago. So why on earth is President Trump talking about solving a conflict that is thousands of years old? Let us listen for a minute to Donald Trump, and while we do, please hold this question in your mind. What does he mean when he frames the problem in such biblical proportions? Here is the president.
So this is a big day, a beautiful day, potentially one of the great days ever in civilization. Things that have been going on for hundreds of years and thousands of years. We're going to, at least we're at a minimum very, very close, and I think we're beyond very close. Most importantly, we discussed how to end the war in Gaza, but it's just a part of the bigger picture, which is peace in the Middle East, and let's call it eternal peace in the Middle East. We can bring an end to the death and destruction that we've seen for so many years, decades, even centuries, and begin a new chapter of security, peace, and prosperity for the entire region. I mean, after 2,000, 3,000 years, whatever it is, I guess it's got to be a little complex, or it would have been done a long time ago. We're right there. We're right there. First time in thousands of years, I think you can probably say, if you really look into it, if you study back, if you're a scholar, you would say thousands of years.
Now, on first hearing, this seems almost comical. Thousands of years. Are we suddenly in the days of King David, or maybe even earlier? But if we stop laughing for a moment and take Trump seriously, what we see is the mindset of an American president whose cultural imagination is deeply shaped by religion. Trump's timeline for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict doesn't begin with Zionism or 1948. It doesn't even begin with the Ottoman decline or British colonialism. In his head, the conflict begins in Genesis, in the story of Abraham's household, in their rivalry between two sons. In other words, he sees Israel as Isaac and Ishmael as Hamas, or the Palestinians, and the Arabs. The fight is not over land or water or borders. It is about inheritance. It is about who carries Abraham's promise. And so when Trump stands there and says he's bringing peace, he's claiming nothing less than to resolve a 3,000-year-old family feud, maybe 4,000 years. And this is exactly why I started This is America, to reveal how history and culture shape daily life in America. If we do not understand these cultural lenses, like Trump's biblical worldview, we cannot really understand American decisions in the Middle East or in many other areas. Seeing this clearly gives us and gives you the agency to interpret American behavior with sharper eyes. You become more intelligent. In chapters 1 and 13 of my book, This is America, the letter I titled Land of Salvation, I talk precisely about this. The place of religion in American life. I explain how biblical culture frames the American worldview. When Americans look at the Middle East and its peoples, they do not just see modern states and political parties. They see the Bible or through the Bible. They map the land according to the journeys of Israel, the steps of Jesus, the missions of the apostles. Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Jericho, these are not only towns on the map of Israel, they are stages in a divine drama. So when Trump addresses the conflict, he doesn't begin with the 20th century. He begins with Genesis 21. Of course, the question of inheritance is the old primordial question. Who is the son chosen to carry God's covenant? Jews and Christians say it was Isaac. Muslims say it's Ishmael. And therefore, the conflict is not about borders drawn by the United Nations. It is about divine legitimacy. And that is why Trump's framing struck many as bizarre, yet from within his worldview, it is absolutely consistent. If he can bring peace, then in his telling he has resolved a biblical conflict. His solution is no longer just a diplomatic agreement. It is a settlement on the scale of Scripture itself. And that is why he said, without hesitation, that this day marked a world historic moment, a civilizational turning point. Now, I am not a religious man. I prefer to analyze things systematically, and using my prior research, I suggest to you today to lay out the genealogy of the conflict as one that stems from Abraham's household. But if you look carefully, what Trump is attempting is something rather practical. He knows religion will not go away. He knows you cannot persuade Jews to give up Isaac or the Muslims to give up on Ishmael. But what he tries to do is bypass the religious feud to offer a pragmatic, down-to-earth economic peace. You might call it biblical theater with a business plan attached. And if he were actually to succeed, well, then yes, it would indeed be a biblical scale solution. Just as the trauma of October 7 felt biblical in its scope, so too the punishment inflicted on Gaza carried biblical echoes. Trump places his plan on the same plane, epic, almost apocalyptic. And yet, one could say that Trump was simply mistaken. The conflict did not begin thousands of years ago. In some ways, it began just over a century ago with modern Zionism. In its fiercest forms, it began only after Israel signed peace treaties with Egypt and Jordan, leaving the Palestinian question burning on its own on the side. From the first Intifada to the wars in Gaza, this is a modern conflict, rooted in nationalism, colonial legacies, and unresolved borders. So why push it back to Genesis 21? The answer is because that is how the American cultural mind works. As I argue in This is America, even though the United States is a modern democracy with separation of church and state enshrined in its constitution, the culture remains deeply tied to Christian and biblical identity. Americans, even secular politicians, cannot escape thinking in biblical frames. For them, history is not only modern, it is sacred history. And when Trump says he has solved the conflict of thousands of years, he is placing himself in that sacred history. In his imagination, he is no longer merely a deal-maker from New York. He is a peacemaker on par with Abraham, Moses, or perhaps even Jesus himself. And here is a thought for you. If Trump actually wanted to claim a Nobel Peace Prize, what better argument could he make than this? As he himself said, if his plan works, then he has solved an epic biblical thousands of years old feud. And if you believe him, then of course he deserves a prize of biblical proportions. But if you remain skeptical about the promise of peace, you may also recognize the deeper truth that this conflict at its core is religious, and that neither money nor power nor threats can fully suppress the religious drive that animates it, from the Palestinian side, yes, but also from the Jewish side. This is not just politics, this is faith. And this is also one example of a much broader cultural pattern. Americans constantly interpret reality through their cultural inheritance, whether they realize it or not. And part of the mission of this channel and my book and my course is to show you those hidden roots of reality, so you can see clearly, choose freely, and live with greater agency. So next time you hear an American president speak about the Middle East, remember, he may not be referring to the last 100 years at all. In his imagination, we are not Israelis and Palestinians. We are Isaac and Ishmael. And the question I want to leave you with is this one. If Americans see this as a biblical conflict of thousands of years, can it truly be resolved with modern tools, economic incentives, military deterrence, or diplomatic talks? Or are we trapped, as Scripture itself might put it, in an original sin from which there is no easy escape? Write to me in the comments or send me an email. Was Trump right when he dragged us back to Genesis 21, or was he simply inventing his own version of history? Either way, you can read more about this in my book, This is America, A Portrait of a Nation at 250. And do join us at the course I will be launching around the book. The link will be below. Until next time, I am Professor Gad Yair.